So today we're reading from Bhagavad Gita 8 chapter 8.1. This chapter is titled Attaining the Supreme. Arjuna Uvacha Kim Tad Brahma Kim Adhyatman Kim Karma Purushottama Adibhutam Cha Kim Proktam Adidaivam Kim Uchyate. Arjuna inquired, O my Lord, O Supreme Person, what is Brahman? What is the Self? Kim Tad Brahma, so that is Brahman. Kim Adhyatman, Adhyatman is the self. What is the self? Kim Karma, Karma is fruitive activities. Kim Karma Adibhutam, Adibhutam is material manifestation. And then Adidaivam is what are the demigods. So Arjuna has asked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions. So Krishna answers those. Purport. In this chapter, Lord Krishna answers different questions from Arjuna, beginning with what is Brahman. The Lord also explains karma or fruitive activities, devotional service, and yoga principles, and devotional service in its pure form. So we all know that there is Kevala Bhakti or Shuddha Bhakti, then there is Mishra Bhakti. So Krishna talks about devotional service and also Shuddha Bhakti. The Srimad Bhagavatam explains that the Supreme Absolute Truth is known as Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. In addition, the living entity, the individual soul, is also called Brahman. Okay, we are called Brahman, but we are not Parabrahman. Krishna is Parabrahman, Supreme Brahman. Arjuna also inquires about Atma, which refers to the body, soul, and mind. So according to Vedic dictionary, Atma refers to mind, soul, body, and senses also. So it depends on the context. And only acharyas know what Krishna is saying in the context, and then they will translate it accordingly. So he's asked all these questions. Arjuna has addressed the Supreme Lord as Purushottama, Supreme Person. Purusha Uttama, best of persons. Which means that he was putting these questions not simply to a friend, but to the Supreme Person, knowing him to be the supreme authority, able to give definitive answers. So, so authority, so there is also that, one who surrenders, he should surrender to a person who is qualified to accept the surrender. So Krishna is such a person, that he is qualified to accept surrender, in the sense that he has the potential to protect his the person who surrendered to him. So Arjuna is asking these questions to him, and through his questions we will also be able to understand these answers. 8.2 Adi yajna katham kotra dehesmin madhusudana prayana kale cha katham gneyo si niyatatmabihi. Who is the Lord of sacrifice? So he's asking further question. Who is the Lord of sacrifice? Adi yajna. And how does he live in the body, O Madhusudana? How can those engaged in devotional service know you at the time of death? Prayana kale cha katham gneyo si niyatatma bihi. Niyata atma bihi means those who are self-controlled. Prabhupada is translating this as devotional service. Because really a person who is actually self-controlled is a devotee. Nobody else can be really self-controlled. So, okay, purport. So his questions continue. Lord of sacrifice may refer either to Indra or Vishnu. Vishnu is the chief of the primal demigods, including Brahma and Shiva and Indra. Brahma and Shiva. And Indra is the chief of administrative demigods. So there are primal demigods that are principal demigods and then administrative demigods. So Vishnu is the chief of the principal demigods and Indra is the chief of the administrative demigods. Both Indra and Vishnu are worshipped by Yagna performances. But here Arjuna asks, who is actually the Lord of Yagna? And how does the Lord of Yagna reside within the body of the living entity? Arjuna addresses the Lord as Madhusudana because Krishna once killed a demon named Madhu. Actually, these questions, which are of the nature of doubt, should not have arisen in the mind of Arjuna because Arjuna is a Krishna conscious devotee. So this means that one who is Krishna conscious should not have any doubts about spiritual aspects. So One has to approach Guru and surrender to him and make sure that all his queries are answered so that he becomes fixed in devotion. Therefore, these doubts are like demons. Doubts are like demons. They're going to take us away from bhakti, take us away from devotees. Since Krishna is so expert in killing demons, Arjuna here addresses him as Madhusudana, so that Krishna might kill the demoniac doubts that arise in Arjuna's mind. We should also never settle with doubts. If you have any doubts, we should immediately try to get it clarified. Whoever we think is the right devotees to help do that. But we should not keep doubts. And we should be very clear, actually, the path of devotion, where we stand, what is our path, how to go about it. All of this we should be very, very clear. There shouldn't be any confusion, lack of clarity, doubts about anything. That is why Srila Prabhupada has written so many books, so much of knowledge out there to consume, and all practical application. We don't read Prabhupada's books for knowledge. We read that first time when we're reading, we read it for knowledge. But second time, immediately we should be focusing on practical application, which happens naturally. Now, the word prayana kale in this verse is very significant because whatever we do in life will be tested at the time of death. So this is very important. And finally, the qualification is purity, right? So it doesn't matter whether somebody is giving class, somebody is doing kirtan, somebody is doing something else, somebody is sweeping the floor, it doesn't matter. Everybody will be tested at prayana kale. And the one who will pass the test is the one who is pure at heart. So we have to engage in all activities, not just bhakti, even our normal mundane material activities, everything we should do only for purification. And devotional service specifically to please the Lord, because and when we try to please the Lord, purification is built in. Because this purity is what is going to really take us through this test. Arjuna is very anxious to know of those who are constantly engaged in Krishna consciousness. What should be their position at the final moment? The time of death, all the bodily functions are disrupted. And the mind is not in proper condition. Thus disturbed by the bodily situation, one may not be able to remember the Supreme Lord. Maharaja Kulashekar, a great devotee, prays, Krishna Todiya Pada Pankada Panjarantam Adyaiva me Vishatu Manasarajahamsa Prana Prayana Prana Prayana Samaye Kafavata Pittai Kantavarodana Vidosmaranam Kutaste. My dear Lord, just now I am quite healthy, and it is better that I die immediately. Can we say that? Are we ready to say this? That I die immediately. So that the swan of my mind can seek entrance at the stem of your lotus feet. Because at the time of death, Kafavata Pittai, everything is aggravated. Said that not even like proper sound will come out of our throat. How will we call Krishna's name? So Kulshekar Alvar is saying, I don't want to die like that. Now I am healthy. Please take me now, so that I can think about you and enter the stem of your lotus feet. This is the desire of a devotee. He is not attached to this material world. He wants to remember Krishna. He wants to serve Krishna. The metaphor is used because the swan, a bird of the water, takes pleasure in digging into the lotus flowers. Its sporting proclivity is to enter the lotus flower. Maharaj Kulshekar says to the Lord, now my mind is undisturbed and I am quite healthy. If I die immediately thinking of your lotus feet, then I am sure that my performance of your devotional service will become perfect. But if I have to wait for my natural death, then I do not know what will happen, because at the time the bodily functions will be disrupted. My throat will be choked up and I do not know whether I shall be able to chant your name. Better let me die immediately. Arjuna questions how a person can fix his mind on Krishna's lotus feet at such a time. This is very important for all of us. Ante Narayana Smriti. But then we also know that even if physically we are not in a position, if we have served Krishna throughout our life, then Krishna will remember us. Guru will remember us. Srila Prabhupada will remember us. They will extend their hand towards us even though we might not be in a state. Actually, it is said Krishna will give us remembrance at that time. So, the whole idea is not to wait till the last moment. The whole idea is to be constantly engaged in service of Krishna, Guru and Krishna, so that by their mercy, either we will be in a state to remember them. And whenever I think about this, I think about how my father left his body in the middle of Harinam Sankirtan. And then other devotee said that, it was like a sannyasi leaving his body. And what did he do? I mean, basically he had complete surrender he had surrendered to Srila Prabhupada, and he had also surrendered to Guru, though not officially. And in fact, when my Guru Maharaj, he instructed me, saying that take him home. If he has to leave his body, let him leave in the midst of Harinam. And then he briefly spoke to my father, and my father was very, very clear. He heard Maharaj very clearly and said, okay, I want to go home. And then so beautiful. I mean, though he came back home, and then right in the middle of Harinam, he left his body. So this is because of his surrender, his sincerity, that Krishna gave that mercy to him, that he could actually, that there were devotees around him trying to help him remember. So this is a big service actually for those who are in the stage of leaving their body. Devotees should go and chant so that it will bring their remembrance. Very important service. Anyway, so the point is that we should serve Krishna throughout our life. See, today we are all stuck with, we are busy, work, time, this, that, and all that, but we are not seeing fast forward. We are not fast forwarding our life. And we are not seeing what will be. If we don't do now, when will we do? Life will go off. It will just get over. And then what will you bank on at that time? You have to bank on something for which we should have done something during our life. So it's very, very important that actually we become very serious and not simply waste life by, not that devotees are doing sense gratification, but not completely dedicated also, not completely surrendered. And it's very important because this question is what finally we all have to answer. 8.3. Sri Bhagavan Vacha. So Lord starts answering. Aksharam Brahma Paramam Swabhavodhyatman Uchate Bhuta Bhavodbhavakkaro Visarga Karma Sangitaha. Supreme Personality of Godhead said, the indestructible, transcendental living entity is called Brahman, and his eternal nature is called Adhyatma, or the self, eternal nature. Action pertaining to the development of the material bodies of the living entities is called karma, or fruitive activities. Brahman is indestructible and eternally existing, and its constitution is not changed at any time. But beyond Brahman, there is Parabrahman. Brahman refers to the living entity, and Parabrahman refers to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So we are clear what Brahman is. Brahman refers to the living entity, Jiva. The constitutional position of the living entity is different from the position he takes in the material world. In material consciousness, his nature is to try to be the Lord of matter. But in spiritual consciousness, Krishna consciousness, his position is to serve the Supreme. When the living entity is in material consciousness, he has to take on various bodies in the material world. That is called karma, or varied creation by the force of material consciousness, by the force of material consciousness. So we are forced to take different bodies. It pushes us because our consciousness decides what our next body is. And so this is, so the jiva, Brahman, constitutional position, servant of Krishna, and conditioned position, servant of Maya, and keeps taking on different bodies. So Brahman is clear, indestructible jiva. In the Vedic literature, the living entity is called Jivatma and Brahman, but he is never called Paramatma, Parabrahman. The living entity Jivatma takes different positions. Sometimes he merges into dark material nature and identifies himself with matter, and sometimes he identifies himself with superior spiritual nature. And therefore he is called the Supreme Lord's marginal energy, Tatastha Shakti. According to his identification with material or spiritual nature, he receives a material or spiritual body. In material nature, he may take a body from any of the 84 lakh species of life, but in spiritual nature, he has only one body, which is spiritual. In material nature, he is manifested sometimes as a man, demigod, animal, beast, bird, etc., according to his karma. To attain material heavenly planets and enjoy their facilities, he sometimes performs sacrifices, yagna. But when his merit is exhausted, he returns to the earth again in the form of a man. This process is called karma. Kshine punyam artyalokam vishanti. So this is karma. The Chandogya Upanishad describes the Vedic sacrificial process. On the sacrificial altar, 5 kinds of offerings are made into the 5 kinds of fire. The 5 kinds of fire are conceived of as the heavenly planets, clouds, earth, man, and woman. And the 5 kinds of sacrificial offerings are faith, the enjoyer, moon, rain, grains, and semen. In the process of sacrifice, the living entity makes specific sacrifices to attain specific heavenly planets and consequently reaches them. When the merit of sacrifice is exhausted, the living entity descends to earth in the form of rain, then takes on the form of grains. Then he takes the form of grains first. Then grains are eaten by man and then transformed into semen, which impregnates a woman. And thus the living entity once again attains the human form to perform sacrifice and so repeat the same cycle. In this way, the living entity perpetually comes and goes on the material path. The Krishna conscious person, however, avoids such sacrifices. He takes directly to Krishna consciousness and therefore thereby prepares himself to return to Godhead. So we don't have to go to heaven and then come down and get into this cycle. It seems like it's better than life on this earth, but actually even demigods and even Brahma wants to take birth on this earth because it's the most conducive body for attaining Supreme Lord. So we should not waste our life in achieving these trivial material benefits in this material world. Impersonalist commentators on the Bhagavad Gita unreasonably assume that the Brahman takes the form of Jiva in the material world, and to substantiate this, they refer to chapter 15, verse 7 of the Gita. But in this verse, the Lord also speaks of the living entity as an eternal fragment of myself. Chapter 15, verse 7. Chapter 15, verse 7. Mamaivaamsha jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatanaha manasasthani indriyani prakritistani karshati. So here mama amsha jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatanaha takes the form of Brahman, takes the form of jiva in the material world. No, the living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. But they are Mayavamsha, they are eternal fragment of myself. So the fragment, so this is one problem with interpretation of Gita. Gita can be interpreted the way we want because it is really infinite, because it's the Lord's words. So impersonalists tweak it to their liking and then get stuck in this material world. The fragment of God, the living entity, may fall down into the material world, but the same Supreme Lord, Achyuta, never falls down. Therefore, this assumption that the Supreme Brahman assumes the form of Jiva is not acceptable. It is important to remember that in Vedic literature, Brahman is distinguished from Parabrahman. So they say that Parabrahman has become Jiva, which is nonsense. Because then Parabrahman has come under the control of Maya, which is inferior energy. No, Brahman has become Jiva, which is correct. And Jiva, when he goes back, he becomes purified, goes back to the spiritual world, he becomes Brahman. But he doesn't become Parabrahman. Becomes Brahman as in he realizes his Brahman qualities, because now he is associating himself with material qualities. When he becomes pure, he associates himself with his pure qualities, which are Brahman qualities, because he's part and parcel of Parabrahman. But it's not that the Supreme Parabrahman has become Jiva. That is nonsense. So anyway, so here coming back, basically the Jiva is called Brahman, and Prabhupada has not actually explained. His eternal nature is the self. Atma, Adhyatma, eternal nature is to serve the Supreme Lord. That is his nature. Action pertaining to the development of the material bodies is called karma. And karma is different: karma, vikarma, and akarma. Karma is fruitive activities, which means that those activities which will give us material benefits in the next life, not in this life. And vikarma is attempts to do things which are not approved, trying to get material happiness in this life, which is actually called illegal. It is illegal and it is punished. And so those who engage in vikarma might think that they are getting some immediate happiness, but actually because it is sinful, they are actually punished in the next life. And so here Krishna is talking about, Arjuna asked about karma, fruitive activities, which means that activities meant to give us material happiness and taking the approved path. And Krishna is saying that, okay, karma means fruitive activities. If anybody has any questions, you can kindly ask. 8.4. Adibhutam ksharo bhava purushasthadhitaivatam adiyagnoham evatra tehe deha bhritambara. Best of the embodied beings. The physical nature, which is constantly changing, is called Adibhuta, which is the material manifestation. It is constantly changing. The universal form of the Lord, which includes all the demigods, like those of the sun and the moon, is called Adidaiva. And I, the Supreme Lord, represented as the super soul in the heart of every embodied being, I am called Adiyagna. The material manifestation is Adibhuta. The universal form of the Lord is Adidaiva. And the Supreme Lord himself as Paramatma is Adiyagna. The physical nature is constantly changing. Material bodies generally pass through 6 stages: birth, growth, remain for some duration, produce byproducts, dwindle, and they vanish. The physical nature is called Adibhuta. It is created at a certain point and will be annihilated at a certain point. The conception of the universal form, the Supreme Lord, which includes all the demigods and the different planets, is called Adidaivata. And present in the body along with the individual soul is the super soul, a plenary representation of Lord Krishna. The super soul is called Paramatma or Adiyagna and is situated in the heart. The word Eva is particularly important in the context of this verse, because by this word the Lord stresses that the Paramatma is not different from him. The super soul, the supreme person of Godhead, seated beside the individual soul, is the witness of the individual soul's activities and is a source of the soul's various types of consciousness. Source means that he allows for it. He Anumanta Upadrishta. So he gives permission. But the type of consciousness that the soul wants is his own desire. But he's just the source, which means that without Paramatma, soul cannot actually even experience anything. The super soul gives the individual soul an opportunity to act freely and witness his activities. The functions and witnesses his activities. the functions of all these different manifestations of the Lord automatically become clarified for the pure Krishna conscious devotee engaged in the transcendental service to the Lord. The functions of all these different manifestations, which is Adi Deva, Adi Yagna, and Adi Bhuta, that becomes automatically manifest to a pure devotee. And for us, we have to break our heads, trying to understand what is being told. But for a pure devotee, he simply realizes it by the mercy of the Lord. Bhagavad Tattva Vijnana Mukta Sangasya Jayate. Just becomes realized. He realizes all this knowledge. The gigantic universal form of the Lord, called Adi Daivata, is contemplated by a neophyte who cannot approach the Supreme Lord in his manifestation as Super Soul. So first is Adi Daivata, universal form. Then somebody might come to Brahman, then they might come to Paramatma, and finally Bhagavan. The neophyte is advised to contemplate the universal form or Virat Purusha, whose legs are considered the lower planets, eyes are considered sun and moon, and whose head is considered the upper planetary system. Antakale cha mameva smaran mukva kalevaram ya prayati samadbhavam yati nastyatra samshayaha. And whoever at the end of his life quits his body, remembering me alone, at once attains my nature. Of this there is no doubt. In this verse, the importance of Krishna consciousness is stressed. Anyone who quits his body in Krishna consciousness is at once transferred to the transcendental nature of the Supreme Lord. Transcendental nature of the Supreme Lord. And what is the nature? The Supreme Lord is the purest of the pure. Therefore, anyone who is constantly Krishna conscious is also the purest of the pure. The word smaran, remembering, is important. Remembrance of Krishna is not possible for the impure soul who has not practiced Krishna consciousness in devotional service. Therefore, one should practice Krishna consciousness from the very beginning of life. Krishna consciousness basically means consciousness about Krishna. So one should practice consciousness about Krishna in devotional service by following the path of devotional service, which is Shravanam Kirtanam. If one wants to achieve success at the end of his life, the process of remembering Krishna is essential. But we cannot remember Krishna only at that time. Therefore, one should constantly, incessantly chant the Mahamantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Constantly, incessantly. Lord Chaitanya has advised that one be as tolerant as a tree. Therefore, there may be so many impediments for a person who is chanting Hare Krishna. Yes, this is a practical fact all of us experience. Impediments at home, impediments at work, impediments with relatives, impediments during preaching, impediments with the mind, impediments with the body. We become source of impediments for other devotees. So many problems we getting stuck in. Nonetheless, tolerating all these impediments, so we have to tolerate. Many times, mostly we want to escape, we want to run away, we want to free ourselves from the impediment, but we don't understand that impediment, Krishna has put us into that situation for our purification. So instead of focusing on learning, purifying ourselves from that situation, we try to bring our attention to escaping from that situation or getting a solution to that situation. Actually, solution is not that important as much as tolerating and learning from the situation and purifying ourselves from the situation due to the situation. So here Prabhupada is saying tolerating all these impediments. Tolerate. One should continue to chant Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So that at the end of one's life, one can have the full benefit of Krishna consciousness. So this is our real mantra. Tolerate and constantly, incessantly chant. If we can do both these, then we will achieve perfection. There is no doubt. And why this tolerance? Because if we become intolerant, then we will not have patience to think about Krishna. If you're tolerant in spite of all difficulties, we will think about Krishna. And how do we think about Krishna? Initially, we just chant the Hare Krishna, because directly thinking about Krishna requires a lot more purity. But chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, somehow it becomes like second nature. We'll keep chanting. And as we make progress, as soon as we chant, suddenly we remember Krishna. We remember his form, his activities, pastimes, etc. So we should practice this process of constantly chanting. Somehow or the other, yena kyana prakarena, somehow we should be chanting Hare Krishna all the time. And that is possible only tarorapi Saishnu namani namanadena kirtaniya sadaharihi. That is this kirtaniya sadaharihi. So that is why the third verse of Shikshastakam should be like a, like a necklace around our neck all the time. All the time we should be thinking, am I tolerant? Am I tolerant? Am I being, giving honor even if I'm not getting honor? I'm thinking about the Lord. I'm chanting Lord's holy name. So all the time this has to be the consciousness. Only then we can make progress. Okay, I think we'll stop here unless anybody has any questions.